Welcome to Module 1 of the CSEC Chemistry Exam 2020 review. In this module, we will seek to discuss the particulate theory of matter, the three states of matter, and how to interchange between the various states. First, we will consider our first objective in the syllabus, which asks us to explain how evidence supports the particulate theory of matter. The particulate theory of matter states that all matter is made up of particles, that all particles of one substance are identical, that particles of matter are in constant motion, that temperature affects the speed at which particles move, that particles have forces of attraction between them, and that there are spaces between the particles. The evidence for the particulate theory of matter include Brownian motion, the law of definite proportion, diffusion, osmosis. However, for the purpose of the CXC syllabus, we are to explain experiments involving Brownian motion, diffusion, and osmosis. We have no direct evidence of these particles since we cannot observe them with even the most powerful microscopes. All the evidence are indirect evidence. We will consider the three states of matter here. First, we have a beaker containing a solid. As you can see, the solid has a definitive shape and it has a definitive volume. The particles of solids are tightly packed in a regular lattice. The particles are held closely together as they have very strong intermolecular forces between them. There are also minimal empty spaces between the particles of a solid. The particles of a solid are not able to move randomly as they have minimal kinetic energy. Let's look at liquids. Here in this container, we see that the liquid has taken the shape of the container. Liquids have a definitive volume, however. The particles of a liquid are more loosely arranged than those of the solid. They can be found in clusters with minimal empty spaces between these clusters. The particles of liquids have moderate forces of intermolecular attraction between these particles. The particles are able to move somewhat randomly as they do have moderate amounts of kinetic energy. On the other hand, for gases, the gases have particles which are randomly arranged, and these particles have high kinetic energy, and so they are in constant random motion. The particles have minimal intermolecular forces between them, and thus they have large pockets of empty spaces between these particles. Here, the particles of solids, liquids, and gases are again summarized in this table. The solids have particles which are arranged in an orderly manner, and they are in a closely packed lattice, as seen here. The attractive forces between our solids are very strong, and the kinetic energy of the particles is very low. In terms of particle motion, the particles of a solid are only able to vibrate and rotate about a fixed position. Liquids have a disorderly arrangement of their particles, and they are less closely packed than are in the solids. The forces of attraction are strong, not as strong as those found in solids. The kinetic energy of our liquid particles is low, and in terms of particle motion, the liquid particles can slide over each other, which allows liquids to be able to be poured out as they can flow. The gases have a disorderly arrangement of their particles. The particles are also very far apart. This is because they have very weak attractive forces between the particles. The kinetic energy of the particles is also very high. The particles are able to move about at great speeds. Next, we will look at our next objective, objective 1.2, in which we are to distinguish among the three states of matter. We are to consider the arrangement of the particles, the energy of the particles, the strength of the forces of attraction, and we are to consider the physical characteristics of the states. Some of these objectives have been covered in the previous slide. Here we have another slide that summarizes the various properties of the three states. As it concerns our solids, they have a fixed shape and a fixed volume. They are not easily compressed, and this is because they do not have many empty spaces between the particles. Therefore, it is difficult to push the particles of a solid any closer together. In terms of the expansion upon heating, the particles of a solid can expand slightly when heated when the particles are given more kinetic energy. They are not able to flow as the particles of the solid are in a fixed lattice, which does not allow the particles to slide past each other. Liquids, on the other hand, are able to take the shape of the container. They have a fixed volume and they are not easily compressed. Again, because there are minimal empty spaces between the particles of a liquid. Liquids can expand upon heating as the particles of the liquid would have gained kinetic energy, which allows more movement. And when the liquid expands, you will see a slight increase in the volume of the liquid. The liquids have the ability to flow. This is because they have weaker intermolecular forces as compared to solids, and so the particles of a liquid can flow past each other. Gases are able to take the shape of their container, and they are able to take the volume of their container as well. Gases can be easily compressed. This is because there are many empty spaces between the particles, which allows the particles to be pushed closer together, thus causing the volume of the gas to decrease. The gases can expand upon heating as the particles would have gained kinetic energy, and so they can move further apart. Gases also are able to flow easily as the particles can move or slide over each other. Now we will consider the experiments which gave evidence for the particulate theory. The first experiment we will consider is diffusion. Diffusion is a process wherein the molecules merge as a result of their kinetic energy of random motion. It occurs in liquids and gases because their molecules move randomly. The molecules move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. This is important for us to remember, which is the definition. The molecules move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, down a concentration gradient until the concentration equalizes throughout the medium. What are the factors that affect the rate of diffusion? First, we will see that the size of the particle is important. At a given temperature, a smaller particle with a lower mass will move or diffuse faster than a larger one. Number two, temperature. As the temperature increases, particles gain more kinetic energy and they move faster, and thus the rate of diffusion is increased. Number three, the concentration difference. The greater the concentration difference between the two regions, the faster the substance will diffuse. Number four, diffusion distance. At a given temperature, it takes longer for the particles to diffuse a farther distance, thus the slower the rate of diffusion. Number five, surface area. The greater the surface area, the greater the rate of diffusion. And number six, permeability. The more permeable the separating surface is, the faster a substance can diffuse through it. In this experiment, which considers diffusion in gases, we see a container here that is filled with bromine vapor in the lower half. There is a separating plate that separates the lower half of this gas chamber from the upper half. As we can see, there is a high concentration of bromine in the lower half and there is no bromine in the upper half. When this separating plate is removed, diffusion will occur as the particles of the bromine will move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration until the particles are evenly distributed. At that point, you will notice that the entire gas jar has a uniform color. The bromine vapor spreads evenly throughout the jar in a few minutes. This process is fairly quick in gases, as gases diffuse rapidly. In this experiment, we will consider diffusion, and we will see how the size or the weight of the particles affects the speed of diffusion. Here we have a gas tube. At both ends of the gas tube, we have cotton wools. This cotton wool was soaked in ammonia, while this one was soaked in hydrochloric acid. We expect that ammonia gas will diffuse from this cotton wool to the right, where the concentration of ammonia is low. So we expect diffusion to occur from an area of high concentration here, where the ammonia is located, over to where there is a low concentration of ammonia. In addition to this, we expect that this cotton wool, which was soaked in hydrochloric acid, will allow hydrogen chloride to diffuse from this cotton wool, from this area where the concentration is high, over to the left where the concentration is low. As these two gases are diffusing in the gas jar, we will expect them to meet at some point. And when they do meet, there will be a reaction between the ammonia and the hydrogen chloride, which will form ammonium chloride, and this gives rise to a white ring, as the ammonium chloride is a white solid. What is important for us to note is the distance in the tube at which the white ring forms. It forms 29.5 centimeters away from the end that had the ammonia and 2.5 centimeters away from the end that had the hydrochloric acid. This suggests that the ammonia had diffused a greater distance than the hydrochloric acid did. The reason for the faster diffusion rate of the ammonia is due to its size and its lower molecular weight. As we can see here, we have the equation for the reaction between ammonia and hydrogen chloride. They will react to form ammonium chloride, which is a solid. This explains the white ring that is seen in this experiment. Now, as to why ammonia diffuses at a faster rate than the hydrogen chloride, this is explained by their RMM, that is the weight of one molecule of the substance in grams per mole. So ammonia has an RMM of 17 grams per mole versus the hydrogen chloride, which has an RMM of 36.5 grams per mole. This is heavier than the ammonia. The ammonia is able to diffuse at a faster rate, as it is a smaller and a lighter molecule as compared to the hydrogen chloride. Next, we will consider osmosis, which is the second piece of evidence which supported the particulate theory of matter. Osmosis is the movement of water or other solvent through a plasma membrane from a region of low solute concentration to a region of high solute concentration. Osmosis is passive transport, meaning it does not require energy to be applied. An alternate definition of osmosis states that it is the movement of water particles from an area of high concentration through a semi-permeable membrane to a region of low concentration until equilibrium occurs. It is important for us to note that in order for water to move, there must be a semi-permeable membrane present. If a semi-permeable membrane is not present, then the water particles will not move. Instead, it is the solute particles that would move by diffusion. In addition to this, we must understand when the water concentration is high as compared to when it is low. In this example, we can see that in this beaker, we have two solutions that are separated by a semi-permeable membrane. This membrane will only allow water particles to pass through the pores. However, the solute particles, are too large to pass through the pores of the semipermeable membrane. The circles represent the solute particles, and the water particles have not been highlighted. On this side, we can see that we have relatively few solute particles. Where there are few solute particles, this means that the water concentration is high. On the other side of the semipermeable membrane, we have multiple solute particles. The higher the concentration of solute particles, the lower the water concentration. In these beakers, we can see that osmosis has occurred. At first, we had on this side of the semipermeable membranes, part A, we see that the solute concentration is low, as represented by these circles, and the water concentration is high. On the other side, we see that we have more solute particles, so the solute concentration is high, and that drops the water concentration. Therefore, there is a high concentration of water inside A and a low concentration over on side B, and thus water moves by osmosis from side A to side B through the semipermeable membrane, and thus causing the water level to increase on side B and it decreases on side A. This demonstrates osmosis. We have another experiment which illustrates osmosis. As we can see here, we have a potato strip that has been cut to create a well in the center. In the center of this potato strip, we have a sugar solution. The cells of the potato contain cell membranes, and the cell membranes of the potato are semi-permeable. Now, because we do have a semi-permeable membrane within the potato, then this allows osmosis to occur. Outside in the beaker, we have pure water. There is now a concentration gradient which will allow for osmosis to occur. The pure water has a high concentration of water as there are no solutes inside of it. However, the sugar solution has a lower concentration of water because the presence of the sugar in the water has dropped the concentration of the water. There is therefore a gradient for osmosis whereby water will move from out in the beaker where the concentration is high, passing through the potato which has the semi-permeable membranes to enter into this well where the concentration of water is low. As a result of that, after a few hours, we will notice that the water level inside of the potato well would have increased and the water level outside in the beaker would have decreased. Next, we will discuss the phenomenon of Brownian motion, which is an experiment that provided evidence for the particulate theory of matter. The Brownian motion is the random movement of microscopic particles suspended in a liquid or gas caused by collisions with molecules of the surrounding medium. It was named for the Scottish botanist Robert Brown, the first to study such fluctuations. This simple demonstration of Einstein's explanation for Brownian motion shows little particles batting about a more massive one. It essentially can be depicted by particles of pollen grains dancing on the surface of a river or of a water body. To the naked eye, we will see the particles of the pollen grain moving. The reason why the pollen grains are moving is because they are being hit by the particles that are present in the water. We, however, cannot see the particles of the water with our naked eye. We, however, can see the pollen grains moving, and this also provides evidence that the pollen grains are made up of particles, and it also suggests that the water is made up of particles and that the water particles are colliding with the particles of the pollen grain. This is another experiment that demonstrates Brownian motion. In this air cell, we have smoke particles. We shine light at it, and we look down in this air cell using a microscope. We would notice that we see the smoke particles moving randomly. Why are the particles of the smoke moving randomly? This is because the particles of air, which are invisible to our eyes even through the microscope, are hitting the particles of the smoke, causing the smoke particles to move in these random directions. This gives evidence for the fact that smoke particles are made up of smoke particles have a particle nature. In addition to that, it suggests that the air around the particles of the smoke also contain particles themselves, which suggests that all matter, whether solids, liquids, or gases, do have particles inside of them. The next objective to be considered, which will be discussed in Module 2, is an explanation of the changes between the three states of matter in terms of energy and the arrangement of particles. Consideration will be made for freezing, melting, boiling, evaporation, sublimation, condensation, and we will also discuss the heating and cooling curves. These will be discussed in Module 2.